Fanfic. Which is what if Naruto, the immortal Hokage, found love in harem with Hinata, Sakura, Temari, Shion, Koyuki and the princess of every land. Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. The village of the Hidden Leaf had seen a lot of things happen in a very short span of time, it had weathered much and now it was standing all. The village of the Land of Fire now had new hope and the people were able to enjoy a new period of peace and prosperity while still making sure to keep up in protecting the balance between the 5 elemental countries. The Shinobi Alliance had lost many of its members, but they had won the war with Uchiha Madara and Sasuke Uchiha. The war had been led by the 5 Kages, who had survived the battle though it had been with the aid of one of the most recognized heroes of the village of Konoha, who ironically was once the object of hatred and fear due to being a Jinchuriki for the majority of his life. Naruto Uzumaki, who had once been the class clown and the object of hidden scorn and hatred, was now considered the savior and hero of the village after his battles with Akatsuki and with Pain when the ninja attacked the village. When he and the last of the Jinchuriki, Killer Bee, had fought together to face off with the leader of Akatsuki and to ensure the defeat of the man's plans, it was a battle of titanic proportions and had literally been a battle that shook the very foundations of the world. It was here that Naruto used the power bestowed on him by Sasuke's brother Itachi to defeat his former friend. It was enough to ensure that while he would survive, he would no longer be a threat to the world as his Sharingan, despite the implants of his brother's eyes by the maniac Uchiha, head was completely deactivated, rendering him blind to the world in every sense of the word. This had finally put an end to Madara's plans and his eventual death at the hands of the 2 Jinchuriki had been assured. There had been some dark moments as both were pushed their absolute limits and then some, but it was over and Madara finally died and was no longer a threat to the freedom of the world. After the battle, all 5 villages wanted Sasuke punished for his crimes, but Naruto decided to speak and not kill Sasuke. Even though others disagreed, he reminded them that he had been the one to stop his former friend and therefore it was up to him how he would be dealt with. Sasuke raged and insulted Naruto, calling him nothing more than scum, but Naruto was no longer easily goaded and while still feeling a measure of friendship to Sasuke, he saw that the friend he once had was gone. But without the Sharingan and his ability to see, Naruto decided to exile Sasuke in a prison that would ensure that he would no longer be a threat to anyone, but he was to be provided humane treatment, food, water, and medicine, even if he refused. The former Uchiha spat at that, but even in his hatred, he knew that nothing would change things. His desire to use his hatred on the world was destroyed and he now was in darkness forever. After that, Tsunade served as Hokage for 3 more years until she relinquished her position to Naruto. But before she left the position of Hokage, she decided to reveal Naruto's true heritage to the village. Upon hearing of Naruto's parentage and the real events surrounding the deaths of the 4th Hokage and his wife, the villagers who had before treated Naruto with hatred, resentment, and contempt found themselves horrified at how they had treated Naruto when he was a child and sought to ask for his forgiveness for their actions. The others who were his friends were surprised, even more so were the other Jonin apart from Kakashi, who had long since known of Naruto's true parentage. When he took the rank of Hokage at age 19, the youngest Konoha ninja on record to ever ascend that rank since his father Minato, Naruto assembled the villagers and began to point out those who had always looked down on him and forgave them, much to their shock. He then told them that after all he had been through, he understood how they felt now and why they resented him so much. But he showed that he still saw them as people he would protect and he had never allowed the harshness and difficulty of his life to bring him down, and he did everything that he could manage to do to show that he was more than what he seemed to them. And now he had succeeded, though he admitted that even though he had achieved his lifelong dream and had brought peace to the lands, he was still a bit unsure about being Hokage as he was not as gifted as the others before him, namely his father. He tearfully wished that his parents were here to see their son become Hokage, and that was enough to make people nod in agreement and they supported him. He then asked that several people step forward when called. He called Kakashi, Baruka, Yamato, Sai Tsunade, much to the Sanin's surprise, and Shizune. He told them that they were going to be the new members of the council as he trusted them all with his own life. This surprised many, including the ones in question, but they accepted it even though Tsunade was not looking forward to looking at papers once more. Naruto however assured her that she was not going to be working alone this time around. Naruto vowed to do everything he can to make the will of fire burn for all, and the generations that were soon to come into this world. He then asked for the support of the people to achieve that goal together, and that was something that made every member of the village smile, along with those who Naruto considered as his lifelong friends. When he became Hokage, he was told that as the last descendant of the Uzumaki clan, he had a choice to rebuild the clan and give rise to it once more by those who were well versed in the laws of the land. The law stated that as a legitimate heir to a clan that was still alive after so many years, he had that choice to marry and help rebuild the clan from scratch. He consulted his new counselors on that suggestion and they agreed that it had merit, but it was his decision to do so as the legitimate heir and Hokage of the village. He was a bit worried about it and decided to think it over carefully as he wanted to make a good marriage and not one of mere law or convenience. He had no idea that he was going to be in for more than he bargained for as the news of the situation filtered through Konoha itself, and eventually the rest of the world. It was not long before he was greeted by a wave of letters from various women who wished to aid in the rebuilding of his clan. There were letters from ninja and civilians alike from the Land of Fire and also from other lands and nations as well. He was surprised to find several names from other lands that he recognized. One was from the Land of Demons, from Head Priestess Shion. There she reminded him that she still needed his help to give her powers to a new priestess. The other was from the Land of Snow, Spring, as Koyuki was happy to see him grow up to be the man she hoped he would be, and now she wanted to see just how much he had grown up. The next was from the Land of Vegetables as Haruna wanted to see how he had grown up as well, and she also wanted to thank him for all he had done to change her as a better person. The next was from the Land of Birds as Toki herself expressed great happiness for him and wished to help him in running his village and become a good man in more ways than one. The one that surprised him the most was a letter from Temari of all people. He had not expected that of all things, but Temari replied that this was requested by the council in Suna and even Gaara supported the idea of her being married to him. Besides, Temari had to admit that she had found him to be a good-looking man, and a trustworthy Onia plus he was the only male that her two male siblings respected and approved of as a potential boyfriend or in this case, husband. It was not just from other nations and lands that the letters came from, it was in the Land of Fire as well. He received a letter from Amaru who had become one of the most recognized doctors and surgeons in the land. She wanted to thank him for all he had done for her in her darkest hour and to help heal him in any way that she could. There was also a letter from Hinata herself, asking if he would not mind if she was able to show the full extent of how she loved him for as long as she could remember. He was still trying to get used to all the attention and got the chance to talk with Sakura about it as she could be able to help him figure out what to do with this kind of situation, and after some time, the kunoichi told her blonde friend and Hokage that it would be better if he got to have some time with them all to see if he should accept them into the clan when it was time for him to start with rebuilding the clan he belonged to. He however decided to ask if she was willing to be among them. That had been a tense moment as Naruto tried to explain that he loved Sakura for years and wished to at least know if there was a chance that she could love him back. To his surprise, she agreed and after the women in question arrived, it was going to be a long series of days spent getting to know one another and developing levels of trust and respect between the women. Naruto himself did his best to try and learn as much from them as he could while developing bonds with them as well. It was not long, rather 4 to 10 months before Naruto finally agreed to the idea of being the head of the reborn Uzumaki clan. It was one heck of a wedding and Naruto wondered just how his parents and his godfather would react to this if they were still very much alive today. No doubt his godfather would have wanted him to spill the beans about the wedding night he was going to have and his mother would warn him not to be too rough with the women in his life now and she might wonder if he could handle being with this many females. He didn't even want to guess how his father would have taken it as well, but he had no doubt his father would have been laughing a bit at his expense somewhat. But all that was in the past now. Naruto served as Hokage for over 40 years and rose to be recognized as a Hokage with few equal, rivaling his father and even the other Hokage before him. In his reign, it was the one where while there had been conflict between different ninja and civilian factions, there had been peace and prosperity as well as cooperation and unity in the land. Despite already reaching the age of 59, Naruto still retained his young healthy look and vitality, and unlike the Sannin Tsunade, there was no age and body manipulation involved as Naruto's Uzumaki heritage made itself known. As he was gifted by his clan with great levels of vitality and stamina, he was able to live for a much longer time than others and also have a level of health that was remarkable and give him energy and chakra that was beyond the norm, something that everyone was now aware of. However, the Kyuubi's now purified chakra added to that by giving him remarkable physical abilities and peak health as well as healing rates. This made him nigh immortal in some cases, though he was still liable to die of old age or very fatal wounds. All this made him carry the title of the Immortal Orange Hokage, something that was not going to fade away no matter what he said about it. Of course, for every benefit, there was a trade-off. Naruto had aged slower than the others in his family and his friends, so when they would pass on, he would still linger. This was something that was difficult on the blonde Sannin and Hokage for the many years that he reigned, though he always kept his mind sharp and lived life with every fiber of his being, so he had no regrets being in this life. His clan had grown, he had a large number of children and grandchildren, and was now one of the most recognized clans in the rebuilt village of Konoha, something that sent in a good measure of pride in the Hokage. And when the time came, he finally decided to pass on the title of Hokage to his one apprentice who had proven himself to be a great man and a great warrior of the village, and he knew that his apprentice's grandfather, father, and uncle would be proud. As for him, the time had come to pass the torch on to the next generation, or in his case, the new generation to come. It was high time that another would rise to take the rank of Kage, as he knew that his time had come, since despite his still youthful appearance he was already reaching retirement age, and it would be wrong for him to take all the glory for himself. He was not that kind of person to do such things or think in such fashions. Euro. In the Hokage Tower Euro. Konohamaru looked at Naruto as the Hokage handed him the symbolic hat that denoted the rank of Kage. The now Jonin-ranked grandson of Hiruzen Sarutobi looked at the hat and then to his former teacher with sad eyes. Are you sure about this, boss? Why are you asking me that question? You've wanted to be Hokage yourself, right? And you've worked hard to be the right man for the job, Konohamaru. But still, you're the immortal Orange Hokage, boss. There's no way I can ever surpass you. Naruto sternly replied. Don't think like that. Being Hokage is not about being famous or recognized all the time, Konohamaru. You have a duty and a responsibility towards the village of Konoha, as well as your family. Keep that and the will of fire in your mind always. Besides, it's your time to make your own legacy. The Jonin looked at the man he had admired since the day they met and learned the important lesson of working hard to achieve one's dream. He smiled and took the hat and replied, I accept the position of Hokage, Hokage-sama. Naruto smirked and replied, good, and it's about time to use that title. It was then that another figure came who Naruto easily recognized even with the looks of old age on him. Ebisu was still the same as before but had served well as a special trainer for many promising ninja in the village like before. Naruto knew that to be true, as a number of his children had been Ebisu's students after all. The Jonin spoke then to Naruto with great respect in his voice as he did so. I will do my best to help Konohamaru-san to achieve his dream and make a legacy he can be proud of, Hokage-sama. I have no doubt that you will. Now then, we have much to prepare, but for now, I need to take some time alone for myself. Euro. Naruto headed to the new Uzumaki estate. The place was deserted for today as his family had been very busy on their daily routines in the village as well as their duties abroad, and all of them were now bunking down for the night. He made his way to the graveyard there and looked at the gravestones. He felt some sadness as he looked at them all. They had the names of the women he had been married to as they had now passed on into the afterlife. This was one of the reasons why he had some desire to pass on the mantle of leadership. He was hardly a coward, but he wanted to take some time for himself. He had done so much and he had so many memories that he wanted to take a break from them all, just for a bit. As he looked at each gravestone, he gently recalled all of the memories he had with the women he had fallen in love with and married. He looked at Sakura's gravestone, Temari's gravestone, and then Hinata's, then Amaru's, Shion's own gravestone, Koyuki's, Toki's, and Haruna's. As he looked at them he touched each stone gently, running his hands on their names and remembering all the good times and bad times, as well as the Euro pleasurable times. Each woman brought a facet of happiness in his life, and it was something that he was going to remember well and keep close to him at all times. Raising his children had been a good thing for him and them as well, and while there were ups and downs in those times, he would never trade those moments for all the Ryo in the world. Many of his children would up as ninjas of great skill, though others took the role of daimyo, and priests as well as doctors. This made the Uzumaki clan become famous once more, and in some ways, some considered that to be almost as capable as the famed Senju clan of the past, though they were also gifted in their sealing jutsu as Naruto inherited from his mother's sealed records and those of his father's. He inherited his father's signature kunai and had a pair of swords specially made for him by Koyuki's order and had a coat similar to his old one made as well. And he had no doubt that his clan's new generation was going to make their marks in their world soon. He wished them all the best for what they were going to do in the future. He did so by passing the toad summoning contract to his eldest son Minato, who was his firstborn son with Sakura, and also to Ryu, who was his firstborn son with Hinata. He had no doubt that both his eldest sons, who he would also make as the new dual clan heads of their family, would be good leaders. It was then that he felt something stir in the wind, and he quickly turned and drew out a kunai and found himself facing someone who he didn't recognize as there were shadows hiding his or her appearance from sight. Who are you? So Euro, you are the immortal Orange Hokage, the head of the newly rebuilt Uzumaki clan. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he looked at the being and replied once more. I don't know who you are, but unless you start talking, I am going to assume you are a threat and I am going to deal with you right now. The figure chuckled and replied, now that is hardly the way to speak to one of your own young man, though I have to admit, you so resemble your mother in nature and attitude I should not be surprised. Naruto's anger stopped cold as he looked at the figure. It was then that he noted some sort of glow around the figure, who then revealed himself a Euro, or rather herself. The figure was of a woman who seemed to have a regal bearing and wore an elaborate but battle-ready kimono and had to seal tags on her hair. She was beautiful and carried herself with a regal and powerful bearing as well. She also radiated the aura of a ninja like him, though hers was far different, yet familiar at the very same time. He quickly recognized her well enough. After all, his mother Kushina had talked about her and even showed her an image of the woman in question. Why, you're Naruto Uzumaki, the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi Euro. And a Euro. Naruto smiled and finished for the flabbergasted blonde Hokage. Wife of the first Hokage Euro and great-grand aunt of your mother Kushina, it is a pleasure to finally meet my dear nephew in persona Euro, even though I'm not exactly alive to begin with. Naruto had one fear that lingered on despite his age and experience, and that was the fear of ghosts or the supernatural. Euro, ironic for a man who had faced so many threats at so young an age when he was still a genin. Why, you're a ghost? Not exactly. It's true that I am dead, but I am not bound here to the world of the living like ghosts do. I came here to speak to you in person. About what? About your desire to stand down as Hokage, or rather the feeling you have in you for some time. You've accomplished so much in your time, you have accomplished your dreams, and you have managed to bring the dreams of your godfather to reality. Now a Euro, you feel lost, as if you were alive without direction, or am I wrong, young one? Naruto remained silent and then replied, yeah, I've accomplished my dream of being Hokage, brought the dream of peace of the pervy sage, and even have such a family now. But I do feel kind of empty. It's not bad, but it is there still. That is to be expected. You have accomplished your destiny after all, and you have lived your life fully. I guess you can call what you are feeling a crisis of purpose. It happens to those who have accomplished much in their lives. They had done so many things that they have developed a desire to do more good things. In other words, you're bored. But that's strange, isn't it? I mean, I've been bored before, but I never felt bored like this before. True, but it is there nonetheless. You craved challenges all your life, Naruto. You struggled to succeed in everything to reach your dreams. But now that you've done it all and you've accomplished them, you feel as if there is nothing left for you. Normally this would not be a problem, but I believe that you feel this way since there are no longer reasons for you to grow stronger, and with the fact that you are still young due to the clan's vitality and stamina and the Kyuubi's now purified chakra in you. Naruto nodded at that, as Mito did make sense. With no more threats to push him to his limits, and his accomplishment of his dreams, there was some level of emptiness in him. It was not that he regretted anything and everything that he had done in his life. He would never change what he had done even if he had the chance to do so a Euro, but still, the emptiness he felt was there, adding the fact that he was something of an immortal due to his clan's gifts of vitality and stamina. Time seemed to move so slowly to him, that made him feel as if he was not going to grow up anymore. Mito then smiled. However, I have a plan. Your destiny here in this world, your duty here is over, and you have so much potential left to use. So I believe that you need to continue pushing yourself and grow stronger, so when you finally meet your end and join your loved ones in heaven, which is a just reward for all you have done, you will no longer feel empty at all, and you can therefore have much to tell them, and I have no doubt that it will be welcomed by them all. Naruto raised an eyebrow at that suggestion by his fellow clan member and his aunt as well. What exactly do you have in mind? Mito smiled warmly at that and decided to reply. That is something that I shall show to you all in due time, Naruto. For now, however, I want you to go through with your plans of stepping down from your place as Hokage. The future is now in the hands of the younger generation, and you have much promise and potential left in you that using it here will not be the same anymore. Before I reveal my plan to you, I wish you bid farewell to all those who know, therefore it will be easier. When I do all that, what am I supposed to do afterwards? Meet me in the one place where everything for you changed, the Valley of the End. With that, Mito vanished, leaving Naruto to think over what she had told him. After a few minutes or so, he looked at the gravestones of his wives and nodded to them, feeling that this was the right decision despite his still lingering doubts on the whole thing. With that in mind, he made his way into the compound and rested for the night, knowing that tomorrow was going to be a very long discussion with his family. A Euro. The next day a Euro. At the gates of Konoha, a large group gathered. In fact, it was actually the entire village who was there at the gates, young and old alike, civilian and ninja. After all, one of their own was about to leave. Many watched as Naruto, now fully dressed, armed, and ready to go on his own personal sojourn, was there before them all. He had also bidden farewell to his old council, and they wished him all the best, though he prayed to Tsunade and Shizune as they had passed away already. He missed his adopted grandmother and hoped that she was finally able to be happy with her loved Onesa Yuro, even Jiraiya in heaven. In the past, many villagers would have loved to see the sight of Naruto leaving their village, all because of their anger and resentment for him being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. They would have held a celebration all over the village as privately as they could now that the demon fox was no longer in their village. The reminder of all the lives lost that night so many years ago, and the death of the beloved fourth Hokage and his wife, along with so many sons, grandsons, daughters, granddaughters, sisters, brothers, and parents. But that was then. Now, after Naruto's long and prosperous reign as the immortal Orange Hokage, the atmosphere was not of jubilation, but of sadness. Many of the village elders were those who had been there during the invasion of pain, They all remembered how the dead leader of Akatsuki had killed so many of their people and ruined the village, and it was Naruto who defeated him, as well as defeating Madara and Sasuke in the Fourth Shinobi War. They were saddened by the fact that he was about to leave the village forever. Some asked if he was going to become a missing ninja, and he replied that he was not, merely going to tour the world before finally meeting his end. This was not easy for them, and neither was it for Naruto, but after a while he bid them all goodbye and told the younger ninjas there, who had been those who he had seen grow up into fine people, that the future was in their hands now, and he wished them to keep the will of fire burning for as long as they were able to do so. Many of them vowed to their former Hokage that they would keep that promise to him no matter what happened. He sensed that they meant it, and as soon as he was ready, dressed in his own long coat that he had worn in his battle with pain, as well as his headband and vest, his swords on his back, his regular and special kunai with him, as well as his spare clothes, scrolls, shuriken, and other things he might need in this new task before him, he bid them all farewell. As he did so, Naruto looked at the rebuilt village once more, the people there in the gate, and he saw the village in the past and saw all of his friends who had passed away. He knew that they were long gone, but he saw them waving at him goodbye along with the people he had cared for in his younger days. He gave them all one final waves and soon left. He traveled to the rest of the lands that he felt that he could visit with the time given to him, namely the village of Suna, then the village where Amaru once lived, then the land of snow, spring, the land of vegetables, the land of demons, and the land of birds. Each place he visited in many occasions, and all held good memories for him, and he vowed never to forget the things he had done in each of these locations. Once he was done, he made his way to the Valley of the End. The place had been changed by the battle between him and Sasuke all those years ago, and he still remembered just what had happened in the valley so long ago. He looked at the statue of Madara and glared darkly at the man it represented, knowing full well what the man had done to so many people, all for his own desires to rule the world and what it cost to stop him and destroy his plans for good. He then looked at the damage that happened in the valley and then directed his attention to one spot. The very same place where he and Sasuke used both Rasengan and Chidori on one another. As he stood there in that single spot, memories came back and he sighed at them, knowing full well where they were going to lead. "I see you've made it, Naruto." Naruto turned. There was Mito smiling at him gently. She still had the same aura and power, but he could see why she was loved by the villagers of her time. The former living kunoichi, the first Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and wife of the first Hokage, looked at her nephew and marveled at how much her line had grown and changed. She placed that aside for the time being and spoke to Naruto. "This place is where it all began for you, in a way, I suppose." "You were right, but why here of all places?" "Events have a tendency to leave behind marks, both physical and spiritual. When you and Sasuke fought here, both with the cursed seal and the Kyuubi's old chakra, it left not just a physical impression but an impression in the ley lines that run through here. This place has been altered, but it takes great power, power that has long been lost to those today." "Okay, Yuro, I think I can understand some of what you are saying." "Good, I see that your father's intellect was not totally denied from you. You will need that in the place you will go. Now then, these changes in the ley lines can also affect other places and even the powers there. If properly harnessed, it can act as doorways to other locations. Like a teleportation jutsu, correct? Though in this case, there is little hand signs involved. I have learned much when I was in the spirit world, and I shall open a doorway for you. However, I must warn you about something important. That is, the portal that I shall summon will be somewhat unpredictable. It will take you to a new world, but it will be difficult to say where you shall wind up." Naruto did not like the sound of that and made that clear to Mito. "That's not very reassuring. I could wind up in a volcano or a monster's stomach for all I know." The kunoichi smiled a bit at him and replied patiently, "You have no need to worry. I will ensure that the portal will remain stable and take you to a safe place in that world. Know that it will be a different and odd journey where you must go, and there is no telling what you will encounter, and the kind of people you shall meet there, but I have no doubt in you that you shall be able to make the most of it. You already have accomplished much in this world we all come from, and now you will travel to another world to make your way there." "Okay, I understand, but what happens to me while I am there in the new world? Am I going to change into something or someone else?" "No, you will be as you are, and while you live in that new world, you will be the same as you were here in this world of ours. When the time comes for you to move on into heaven, you will be guided there by me personally, and I have no doubt that when you meet your friends and family, you will much to tell them." Naruto smiled at the thought, but then realized something. "Okay then, but what happens to those I leave behind in the world I will live in when I die?" Mito thought about that and replied as she was able to find the answer. "They shall come with you when you pass on, and they as well. When that occurs, they will join you in the afterlife. That is to be fair to them all, as you will forge bonds with them, so it would be wrong for you to sever those bonds even in death, for it is your ability to forge bonds and change people that made you who you are." Naruto smiled a bit at that as he thought over the idea of being in a new world, seeing new things, meeting new people, fighting in new battles, and those thoughts warmed him in a way that made him feel even more alive than ever before. This was the kind of thing that he wanted, to see new places, to face new challenges, and to help others. His time as Hokage made him grow stronger as he led Konoha in times of peace and at times conflict. He was not the same anymore when he was young, but he had not changed too much. The things that made him into who he was now had never faded away, and he was going to keep it that way. Mito noted that easily and spoke to him. "Are you ready for this, Naruto?" The blonde nodded and replied in his ever so confident voice. "I am. It doesn't matter where I go in the new world or what dangers I will face in the long run. I am ready, and I will do everything in my power to make sure that no matter what I face or what danger awaits me, I will succeed in what I was sent out to do. But I have to ask, what of the Kyuubi? It's still in me after all, so there's no telling what might happen in what I am going to be doing, so there is a chance the old furball is going to try and take advantage of it." The Kunoichi replied to that. "You have no need to fear the Kyuubi now. You have mastered its chakra and it is yours to command. It will live and it will remain there in you, Naruto, but there is little reason for you to worry. The Kyuubi is without its power, and you have tamed it enough and caged it well inside yourself. It knows that if you were to die, it will die, and without the full power it once had and its hate no longer tainting you, it cannot affect you like it has done in the past." That was a good news to the blonde, as he was not in the mood to have the demon loose in the world once more doing Kami knows what to the people who lived in it, and he was certainly not in the mood for the Kyuubi to be doing who knows what in the new world that he was soon going to be in. Besides, he had his doubts that the new world knows anything about the Kyuubi itself, and despite the fact he did have some dislike in having the Kyuubi in him, he had grown used to it already, and the purified chakra was going to come in handy in the long run. "Okay, let's do this, Mito-san." The Kunoichi nodded and began making some very unique hand seals in a pattern that was too fast for Naruto to follow, and soon he felt the flow of chakra in the air, showing that this was indeed a jutsu that he had seen before in action. He briefly wondered if it was recorded in the Forbidden Scroll somewhere and placed that out of his mind for the time being as he focused on other things. Soon the air before him crackled with power and light, and a glowing blue sphere appeared. It then began to spin before him and Mito, and soon the sphere collapsed in the middle, and the sphere was now like a hoop of pure energy that soon stabilized. Naruto looked at Mito and she nodded with a smile. "It is ready. Good luck, Naruto, and may you do well in the world where your new destiny awaits you. Make the most of it, all right." Naruto nodded, and with all of his belongings with him and stored away in scrolls, he stepped through the portal. Mito smiled for the last time and faded away as the portal closed behind Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, founder and former head of the Uzumaki clan, the sixth immortal Orange Hokage of Konoha, the new Sannin, and one of the most celebrated ninja in the Land of Fire, now left behind the world he had brought to an era of possibilities into the hands of the new generation. He was now going into a brand new world and make his own way in this new world. He had no idea where he was going to land in, or what were the challenges there, or who were the kind of people he was going to meet. But there was one thing that the blonde Hokage knew for a certainty. There was going to be nothing dull in where he was going to be going soon. Euro. In a certain desert planet Euro. "Hey Naruto, we're going to watch a movie, you coming?" No thanks guys, I've got some things to catch up on." The men turned and spoke to one another as they left the factory where they had been working in for the past few hours. "That guy really is dedicated to the job, isn't he? Sometimes I think he's got lug nuts for brains. Say what you like, but he's one of the best mechanics I've seen, and you got to admit, he's not bad looking either. Makes me wonder why he's a third class like the rest of us. Euro, maybe I should ask him if he wouldn't mind having a kid with me." "Huh, lots of luck with that. I think that guy's a bit queer if you ask me." "Oh, yeah, you're not the first to ask him that, and he always turns it down. It's like he's not into his fellow man or something. I got to say this much about that Naruto, if he ain't careful, he's going to end up being one lonely man." As soon as the group was out of earshot, the blonde former Hokage and Sannin couldn't help but shudder as his perfected hearing was quick to pick up what they were talking about. It was going to be a freezing day in hell when he was going to give his seed to any man. The idea of him having a kid with a man still scared the crap out of him, and it took all of his ninja discipline to keep himself from hurling the contents of his stomach. After being with his wives for many years and being able to enjoy the good things about being with women and learning much from them, one thing was certain in the former Hokage's mind. These men had no idea what they were missing out on when it concerned women. Not that he was going to tell them, nor were they going to listen to him or believe him in the first place even if he tried. Naruto reached his home in the city and began to get ready to leave this place, or rather, this whole planet. 6 months Euro, 6 long months since I got sent here by Mito-san Euro. Does she have such a twisted sense of humor or something by sending me into a planet filled with only men with seriously flawed ideas of women? Am I supposed to make an entire planet of males with serious women issues change and like women again? By the Kami, I swear if this is some joke, I am really going to give her a piece of my mind when I find a way to meet her again, clan member or no. Still, maybe this world is just a resting point, it might be elsewhere, and seeing the rest of this new dimension or place I am in is kind of tempting to say the very least, but I guess the only way I find out if that is true or not is to get into the male fleet itself. That's going to be child's play. It had been 6 months since he found himself in this world called Talark. He had arrived through the portal and to his shock, found himself in the desert. At first he thought that the portal had malfunctioned on him or something and he was back in Suna. He looked around and tried to find any marks that he would be able to recognize, and he even sent Kage Bushin out to find the city and see if he could find Gaara or Matsuri or any of their grandchildren. But to his surprise he didn't find any, and so he had to trek through the desert and find water along the way. Thankfully his ability of using senjutsu allowed him to finally locate a great amount of chakra, and that soon led him to what appeared to be some sort of city in a massive canyon. The city was somewhat similar to some of the cities he had already been to, both in his career as a genin and all the way to jonin, and to being Hokage for the past 4 decades before passing his position to Konohamaru, who he knew deserved it for all his hard work. The city had the look of a Megakure, fused with that of Kumogakure and a bit of Kurigakure Euro, though a bit more futuristic than he cared to like. Normally, the old Naruto would have just ran into the city and not care for anything, but that was then when he was still younger and a lot more naive. He had matured a great deal since then and therefore sent a number of his Kage Bushin to recon the city. What he found there was enough to make him feel like he had walked into a horror movie. There were only men there in the city, and unlike his beloved village of Konoha, there was not a single shred of green anywhere. Even Gaara's home of Sungakure had some greenery in it. They place didn't have a greenhouse, no hot springs, no tea houses, none of the stuff he had grown up with and known for all his life was there. It was like he had somehow landed in a completely different land. But the worst things Naruto noted that was lacking in the city of Mina Euro: there were no women, and to his abject horror Euro no ramen. Those things combined were more than enough to force Naruto to try and find some way out of this desert location and find another city to go to. But when he sensed that the cities were a very fair distance away and it would take days to go to them all, he decided to take his time and get more information before he settled in, even though he felt that he was out of his mind to be in a city like that. Euro. For the past few days, he sent his Kage Bushin to recon the city and learn all that he could from the people who called this world called Talark home. They apparently were indeed all men, as any possibility of finding a woman in this sea of men was the same as trying to tell Tsunade not to drink. And they reproduced using artificial wombs to bring babies into term. That obviously artificial method of having children completely freaked him out and made wonder just where in the world did he land in. He had been there to raise his children with his wives when they gave birth in their own times, and he had even been there with them when they gave birth to his children, and he had been there with his children when they gave birth to their own children as well. So the idea of being born without being held by a mother was totally abhorrent to the blonde Hokage, but he kept silent so as to not drag attention to himself in any possible fashion, as the last thing he needed was to be labeled as either insane or a security risk by overzealous guys with guns and whatnot. The next was that they ate food in pills. The very second he tried that, his Kage Bushin as well as him was sickened to the core by the taste, or rather the lack of any taste, and he was even more depressed by the lack of decent food whatsoever on this world he was in. Though he had heard rumors of restaurants on the world that did serve native plant and animal life, but he hardly had time to find these said places. The rest of the information made him rather wary as well. For one thing, the people of this city world had strict rationing laws for all of their resources, and anyone caught spending more a copyright than the allotted shares made by the government or had wasted resources for no viable benefit were either arrested and sent to prison or sent out into the desert to die. It was a cruel law to be sure at first glance, but considering the world they were in, it did make common sense since resources in the desert were limited, though Suna didn't have that problem in his mind last time he was there. Another thing was their laws regarding women. This was something made Naruto really disturbed. The men viewed women as monsters who were the ones who used men as slaves and ate their innards, especially their livers. Looking at a woman would rot away a man's eyes, and listening to one rotted a man's ears and brain. It was the biggest load of crap he had ever heard of in his life, and it annoyed him to no end that the men of this planet actually took in the lies that their government spoke of towards women. To be fair, some women were scary at times, and could be monstrous as well, and he should know well, from his various experiences, but they were hardly innard-sucking monsters to say the least. And it annoyed him even further that the men actually never met women before in their lives and only saw women as the enemy. Another thing he disliked was the caste system in Talark. Men who were third class were treated like scum and dirt by the other two classes, even though they were the ones who worked in the factories and did all the manual labor that kept the entire system running. The second class were the middle ground and were like the merchants, scientists and the like, while the first class got the best of everything: education, health care, food, services and more. It was not something that the former Konoha Hokage liked to see, and it made him angry at times to see how the first two classes of men would treat the other men. No doubt due to his past, he usually had a dislike for those who thought themselves superior to others and had a rapport with the underdogs as he had been one himself in the past. But he disliked it when the third class didn't even stand up for themselves, content with their lot in life, which to him was a defeatist attitude. Of course he decided not to make too much noise and eventually settled into the city, learning all that he could. Despite his dislike for the situation he was in, he did have to give the men of this world credit for having endured in the desert for nearly 3 generations with the conditions that they were in. And while he was not really into studying things, as he disliked it a good deal, Naruto had changed a good deal as well from his old self, and that was why he researched as much as he could on why the men were here of all places. He learned that they had been part of a colonization fleet and had been from another world entirely, though for reasons unknown to most people in the city or on the world for that matter. No one knew of what happened that led to them fighting the women. Some men who were the obvious hardliners stated that it was the women, actions that drove the men to leave them behind and make their own way. Yet another load of crap in Naruto's mind, but he decided that until he got the full story he was going to keep his trap shut for the time being. He however found their technology interesting, TV sets that were different from his world's own, more advanced sources of electrical power, new types of metal manufacturing, and the works. Ships that flew in the sky than in the ocean were not too new to the former Hokage, but ships that went into space was another thing entire. The very second he was able to get into space on a routine repair job as a mechanic in the third class, he was awed by the sight of the stars, the darkness of space, the colors everything. The next thing that got his attention were the newest weapons in the arsenal of the men of Talark. They were the vanguards themselves, the giant human-shaped war machines that the men prided on making for their war with the women in the future when they would one day take the battle with them in space. They resembled the dolls that were used in Suna in the sense that they were manipulated by people, but instead of being controlled either real string or strings of chakra, they were actually ridden by people into battle through controls and power plants that provided them the power to actually move. The vanguards were also armed with the ability to carry various weapons, and have strong armor, could operate in both the surface of worlds and in deep space, could take utility and military roles with ease. They were impressive even to the blonde Sannin, but they were not that impressive compared to the things and beings he had seen in his long life as a ninja and as a Hokage. However, he decided that as soon as he was able, he was going to find a way to leave this world of men behind and find what he was sent here to do by his ancestor Uro, his new destiny, as he had fulfilled his old one in his own world. That was why he decided to take one of the vanguards as his personal unit. He marked it with the symbol of Konoha and managed to get enough time in the training simulations via infiltration and cage bushin. There had been some close calls as the security systems in the planet were all new to him, and it took some serious work to figure out how to beat them. Once he was able to get the time needed to learn how to operate the vanguards properly and use them in both travel and in combat, he worked out how he was going to leave this world and find out just what sort of destiny was awaiting him here in this world. The sooner I get off this world, then all the better, Uro. Naruto however wished that the leaders of the male planet would at least get it into their heads that they should work on how to improve their world and their civilization instead of focusing on war. While their factories and the like were remarkably efficient, the way they focused on war was very much a mistake in his mind. But he doubted that he would get any approval from the men, so why bother with the whole thing? Euro. He finally had the chance to do just that when the word reached him that the Ikazuki was already going to be taking off in 3 days. That was plenty of time for him to get his things together. He had thankfully kept his scrolls hidden away, as well as the basic kunai he had on him, as well as the ones which allowed him to use the flying thunder god jutsu of his father, his swords, his wallet, his other clothes, spare scrolls and the like. The Ikazuki was supposed to be part of a Talark response fleet to deal with the attacks of female pirates from Megar, the home world of the women of Uro, and Naruto wagered a guess that it was a planet filled only with females the way Talark was filled only with men. If his pervy sage of a godfather was with him, Jiraiya would be thinking he was in heaven if he got the chance to go there, and no doubt any other man would kill to be alone in a planet full of femilessa Uro, and he had to admit that his perverted side was eager for that chance as well. But he had no doubt the women would see men as the enemy and probably do a lot of painful things to him if he even came there, and even his sexy no jutsu was not going to help him for too long. With that in mind, Naruto finished his packing and bid farewell to Talark in every sense of the word and decided to go out and see the rest of this world and maybe beyond it. Bypassing security when he arrived at the docks was fairly straightforward, and soon he was in the Ikazuki. Once he bypassed the security systems in the former colony ship, which was now the battleship of the men, he headed to the vanguards and smiled as he found the vanguard he marked before and decided to rest here for a bit and grab some shut-eye. He decided to reminisce about better days and hope that he could find something to do with the destiny his ancestors spoke of. Euro. Unknown to the men of Talark and the blonde Sannin in question, the female pirates had gotten wind of their operation, and were all getting ready to make their move on the Ikazuki, hoping for a good haul this time around in their latest raid on the men. This was also make sure that the recruits formed their world of Megal were seasoned enough on how to do their work as pirates. However, neither the men nor the women of this universe had any idea just who was going to be smashing into their world soon enough. Here comes Chaos Naruto style. On the desert world of Talarka. As soon as the latest propaganda film that was approved by the ministry on Talark was ended, the Prime Minister's speech began as the city was soon bathed in steam as well as lights as row after row of graduates from the military academies of Talark. Behind him and a retinue of higher-ranking officers and a detachment of spear-wielding vanguards was the retrofitted colony ship that brought the men to this world, the Ikazuki. Only this time, the ship was now serving as a military vessel and was the flagship for the Talark naval force that was soon to answer the attacks made by the women pirates of Megal. Among the young recruits was a man who had one side of his face covered by his long mane of black hair. This man in question was none other than Duero McFile, and unlike the rest of the fresh-faced and eager cadets, he was calm and collected in appearance and attitude for the time being, almost as if he was not concerned with the speech of the Prime Minister. Another man was also not paying attention and was actually looking sleepy and yawned as well to prove that point. The man was a blonde youth and looked rather out of place for a military cadet. This one was Bart Garces and was actually part of the military contingent for a far different reason than the rest of the students of the academy. As soon as the speech ended, the Prime Minister shouted out to the men who had cheered at what he had said to them. Why must we wait for the designated hour to finally mete out the fist of justice on the women who have long oppressed our people? Why must we wait to take what is our birthright and claim the stars? We shall go now. The crowds cheered out loudly and soon the cadets were eager to get into deep space to take the fight to the women. However, the men who were running the ship's various systems and engines were stunned at the pronouncement of the Prime Minister. However, they had no time to complain as their senior officers barked out orders to get the ship ready for the early launch. They were soon loaded with the cadets and the command staff of the Prime Minister, and as soon as the ship was on lockdown, the engines roared to life. As the ship's massive thrusters were firing up to push the ship out of the gravitational well, a man who was tilling the harsh Talark landscape with a hoe in what was an obvious attempt to actually grow things on the world. He looked up and smiled a bit and knew that on board there was someone who was going to help change the future of the world he lived on. To what end was still unknown to him, but one thing was certain: it was going to be interesting. In the large room the ship was now currently orbiting over the desert world of Talark and soon was awaiting the arrival of its escort ships. As the cadets drank their wine and were chatting about their soon-to-come adventures in defending their world and their soon-to-come battles with the women, they were also eager to finally get their hands on the newest toys provided with to fight the women. Duero was busy chatting with some of the men, some mentioning that Duero was actually one of the top graduates in the academy but had placed on his papers no exact position that he wanted to take while in the Ikazuki. Many of the men were confused by that, but that was cut short by the arrival of Bart. The man peddled a box of pills that were different from the usual bunch, and when he left to talk to the others, the men were curious as to who he was. Once his identity was revealed by one of the others, they sighed a bit and made a number of comments on the matter, though Duero remained silent on the whole affair. It was then that the film portraying the vanguards was shown to them, and while the majority of the men on board were eager to field the weapons in battle, both Duero and Bart were not all that impressed, to say the least. As the film came to an end, the back of the room where the Prime Minister was speaking parted to reveal a number of the vanguards that were to serve as the examples for the men and were combat-worthy as well. Unfortunately for the men, one such vanguard was marked by a certain symbol and was not alone, as the one who marked it was sleeping nearby, though this time he was fully awake. Naruto was quickly roused from slumber when he suddenly felt the entire room move and lights were coming on. He wondered just what was going on, and when he realized that the room was being lifted up, he knew that something was wrong. Normally the blonde was hard to wake up even with an alarm clock. The only thing that would prevent him from getting to sleep was when something troubled him to the point that sleeping only made the problem worse. When there was nothing in that level, he was like a dead person to the world. However, his wives did find that there were two ways to wake him up. One was to say that he had a mission to do and he would be up, and the other one, the one that they all knew worked the best since it had no need for them strain their vocal cords in waking up their mutual husband, was to say ramen for breakfast into his ear. The latter was undeniably more effective than the former, which was why they took to cooking ramen for him, and he loved them even more for that, and that was a mutual win situation for all involved. However, Naruto had developed the habit of waking up on his own power when something was happened around him that was not normal. And this rising room was not normal in his mind. He looked about and quickly got his gear stored away and readied himself just as the wall before him parted, and he found himself looking at a large number of male graduates and one irate Prime Minister who was shouting out orders. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Naruto looked at crowd before him. He had hoped that he was going to be able to find a way to get his vanguard tucked away at a later date and eventually get himself out of the Ikazuki. Now it seemed that it was not going to happen the way he hoped it would be. However, this was hardly something that he had to worry about as he got himself ready for the soon-to-come fight. He might however have to find another way to get his new toy out of the hands of its soon-to-be former owners. But to do that, he had to escape first, though he had no doubt that the guards before him were not going to make that part of his plan easy in any case. Look, it's one of the third-class citizens. How did one of them get into the Ikazuki? Duero was not convinced that the man before them was a member of the third class as he looked at the blonde despite having the identification card that was used by the third class around his neck. For one thing, there was no way that any third-class citizen wore clothes like this man did. He wore what appeared to be some sort of uniform in black and orange with several areas near the forearms, upper arms, calves, and thighs showing what appeared to be armor plating underneath. The blonde male also had a headband made from black cloth and there was a metal plate there that had a strange symbol etched into the metal itself. The man also wore a vest that was made of green leather and to the man's sharp eye had metallic plating underneath the cloth which meant that it was some form of armor and had a number of pockets as well, and he also had a sleeveless overcoat which was red with black flames on it as well. The clothes looked to be high quality so there was no way that this man was a third-class citizen by any range as they had no way to afford such clothes and armor. The man was also not one would expect from those in the third class. He was in the bloom of health and appeared to be around mid to late 20s, something that was odd for the third class as they only had basic health care and supplies to go with it. He had deep blue eyes, a well-defined face which was given a more exotic look by the three whisker-like marks on his cheeks and blonde hair which was spiky on the stop as well. All in all, the man was actually very good looking as well. If the three guards thought they were going to have an easy time with the third-class trash they found they were dead wrong. The first guard tried to strike hard with a blow to the side. Naruto quickly evaded the attack and lashed out with a strong kick that sent the guard down to his knees. Naruto then leapt onto his back and flipped backwards to avoid a strike to his back from the other guard. While mid-flip he grabbed the guard's shoulder and quickly pushed himself into air at high speed. He ducked quickly as the third guard tried to attack, only to miss and have Naruto turn and introduce his left knee into his stomach. The blonde Sannin and former Hokage turned and lashed out with a hard punch that hit the second guard right in the jaw, sending him out cold while landing a spinning reverse heel kick on the third guard to send him to La La Land and striking with a chop to the back of the head on the first guard that tried to hit him while sidestepping the first guard's attack. Naruto turned and spotted 6 more guards armed with clubs and spears this time around. The blonde frowned briefly but then grinned as he reached behind him and pulled out what turned to be a sword of some sort from his back. Naruto had a pair of special sheaths made to hold his swords. They were made from special wood that had chakra to hold the swords in place no matter what happened and keep them sharp. The only way for the swords to be removed was when he held it as the weapons were attuned to his chakra. The 2 swords were ninjutsu and were very useful to him in his career ever since rising to the rank of Hokage and were the ones made for him by his wife Koyuki as her wedding present to him. They were made to be light but very strong and could have chakra channel through them as well and they had seen Naruto through many battles. One sword was on his back and the other was on his weights though at a diagonal angle and both swords were hidden by his long coat yet were within easy reach. Duero looked on in surprise as the weapon was a straight single-edged sword that was at least 2.5 feet long and appeared to be a well-made weapon and very well kept too with a small pentagon-like hilt guard there along with a 2-handed grip handle. That told him even more that there was no way this blonde was a third-class citizen. The money given to the third class was only enough to make them survive with the bare minimum of support and medical care. There was no way any third-class citizen could save enough with their wages for a weapon, even if it was an inferior one, and this weapon looked too well kept and maintained. The first guard stopped a bit as Naruto held his sword in a one-handed grip but he charged in. The blonde dodged his wild attacks with his club, then blocked the next one with the back of his sword and slammed a punch into the guard's stomach with his free hand and then cutting the man's weapons into nothing but useless handles. He turns and evades the spear strikes of 2 men. He then manages to cut the first spear in half at the middle and deflects the next spear while leapt over both men and striking the 2 men in the back of their legs with the flat side of his sword and strikes both of them in the back of the head with chops from his free hand, sending both guards to unconsciousness. Naruto then took out his other sword, adopting a dual-wielding style that he had learned from his old friend and fellow Jinchuriki Killer Bee. As the others attacked en masse, Naruto quickly began to move through the battle, blocking incoming stabs and swings by both clubs and spears while lashing out with kicks, slashes and stabs to force the enemy away while dancing away from attacks that he could not block with his swords because they were occupied. He then leapt over them and then released both swords from his hands and began unleashing a flurry of punches coupled with high speed and powered kicks to stun the guards and he quickly got both swords as they spun back down and cut the guards' weapons once more as the guards fell down to the ground. Naruto looked and spotted several more guards coming, only this time, they were armed with assault rifles. Naruto quickly realized that now was not a good time to be fighting guys with guns and he quickly placed his swords away. They locked into place and he smiled as the guards came and were about to fire at him. He then threw down a paper ball which exploded into a massive cloud of smoke, surprising the guards as they rushed in to track down the man. However, as soon as the smoke cleared and everything was back to full view, the guards and the cadets were surprised to find out that the blonde man was gone. The guards looked everywhere, even behind Grandpa's statue, and they found nothing at all. There was no sign of the man who had just devastated a number of the guards of the Ikazuki with seemingly no effort. The men were confused as to where the man had gone until they heard a voice above them. Up here. Everyone looked up, and to their surprise and disbelief, the third-class citizen was the Ryūga standing upside down on the roof. What the? How did he get all the way up there? Naruto grinned at them, and to their amazement, he began running to the other side of the room while still on the roof. The guards armed with assault rifles aimed and fired several rounds at the man, unleashing the sounds of gunfire into the area, but the bullets missed the man as he continued to move at a speed that was not possible for someone who was upside down on a roof a good 20 to 50 feet in the air. The blonde then leapt off the roof and then turned in mid-drop to throw something at the guards. All the men heard were several sharp sounds of metal hitting metal, and the guards looked to see the barrels of their guns hit by some sort of weapon. The men looked at the blonde male who smirked at them and spoke only one phrase. "I am out of here." With that, he vanished before anyone could react as the guards shouted out and were now chasing the man to catch him. Euro. While the other men were gossiping like mad on what they had just witnessed before them, Duero moved quickly and silently as he could to the site of the battle and picked up one of the apparent weapons of the third-class citizen, a Euro if that man was one to begin with. He studied it carefully and found the weapon to be very interesting. The weapon was yanked out by one of the guards and tossed aside, and now that it was ignored, the young man had the chance to study the weapon. It was a four-pointed star with sharpened edges on all 4 points on either side, and it seemed to be very lightweight. This plus its well-made aerodynamic design meant that it was quite effective in the right hands, and seeing as to how the man had used these weapons to jam the barrels of the guards' assault rifles with ease while in flight as well. Duero turned to the door that Blonde had just went through and began to think about what he had witnessed, and he smiled a bit. This day might not turn out to be boring after all. Who was that man? Euro. In the bridge, Euro. The Prime Minister was in a foul mood when he and his second-in-command entered the command bridge. What should have been a good show for the planet's latest weapons against the war with the vile women had been turned into a fiasco by the third-class brat who had the gall to sneak on board the Ikazuki and ruin everything. However, what he had witnessed was not entirely bad, but he had a job to do and pressed a switch to activate the ship-wide intercom system and barked out his orders to the security personnel. "Attention to all security personnel, this is the Prime Minister. I want every deck section of the old and new sections of the Ikazuki searched from top to bottom. Find that brat and make sure to tie him from head to foot and then bring him to me alive so I can kill him myself with my bare hands." As soon as that was over, the Prime Minister sighed as he leaned back and spoke. The whole match was ruined, Euro. That was when the second-in-command spoke. "Prime Minister, are you sure that killing that boy is a good idea? The skills he showed were rather exceptional after all. It would be a waste to kill off such youth and talent." "I know, but when I have him here before me, I'm going to give him a choice. Either serve the Talark military as his duty to Grandpa with his skills and teach them to his fellow men, or I will have him tossed out an airlock." Euro. In a hallway, Euro. Naruto whistled a bit as he looked at the intercom, having heard the announcement of the Prime Minister concerning him. Wow, I must have really pissed him off, Euro. Good, it's high time that windbag got some that hot air out of his brain. Hey, it's him. Naruto turned lazily to the side to see 3 of the guards of the Ikazuki looking at him and carrying guns. He smirked and replied, "Oh, hi guys, don't hi us, you third-class reject. You're going to come quietly with us to the Prime Minister right now. And if I say no?" The Prime Minister said to bring you to him alive. He said nothing about brining you to him, beaten up kid. Now are you going to come with us quietly or do we have to mess you up? Let me think, Euro. Oh yeah, here's my answer. You want me, Euro. Naruto then gave them the universal message to leave him alone, which was the upraised middle finger, and turned around quickly and moving to another corridor, but not before completing his statement. "Come and get me." Needless to say, the guards who had gotten the finger were far from amused. They were seeing red as they vowed to get Naruto, beat him until he begged for mercy, and then they were going to drag his beaten carcass to the Prime Minister. As they reached the corridor, they grinned evilly. They knew that the corridor that the blonde had disappeared to was leading to a dead end. That guy is going to be Euro. Gone. The guards were stunned, and for good reason. They had expected the blonde to be trapped and ready to be beaten down for his insolence, but he wasn't around. What the? Where did he go? The guards looked around and tried to find their target, but they were not going to get the chance as the Naruto they had been chasing had disappeared, and for good reason. The Naruto they chased was none other than a Kage Bushin. Euro. In another corridor, Euro. Naruto grinned as he got the knowledge of the Kage Bushin who had just disappeared and lost its pursuers, and he decided to keep moving and find a way out of the area. He was going to get his vanguard at a much later date, once the search for him died down. However, it was then that a series of explosions rocked the ship itself and soon sirens began blaring all over the place. This stopped the blonde cold and he decided to take a gander at a nearby porthole and see just what was going on. The second he saw the slender-looking fighters attacking the male fleet, he wagered a guess on who was attacking. Looks like the women have made a sneak attack. The warning sirens and the calls of the men to go to battle stations was also more than enough to convince the former Hokage that this was a serious attack. No doubt the men were soon going to rally and fight back, and no doubt the vanguards were going to be deployed, but with the men being trainees and overeager, this was not going to end well for the men. As much as he was tempted to be able to see women again, the blonde knew that being around women who no doubt do not want to be around men and might kill him on sight was not the best of ideas. Not that he was adverse to the idea of flirting with danger since he used to do that on a regular basis in his younger days, but now was not the best of time for that. With that in mind, the blonde moved on, knowing that the only concession he was getting from all this was the fact that the men now had other things to focus their attention on. However, he did spare a thought on one thing. He was curious how women in the planet of Megal had kids. He knew that only women were able to have children, so they had to use some different method of having children without men on their world, otherwise they wouldn't be able to colonize a whole planet. How did they do that? It was then that a particular thought began to worm its way into his brain concerning the women of Megal, and that was on how they relieved stress and built up relationships with one another in the romantic and physical sense. The second he had that thought his head, the blonde showed a perverted grin on his face as he realized how they might do that. Whoa, not now, we can entertain those thoughts later. First we've got to get out of here before things really out of hand. Pandemonium was all over the bridge of the Ikazuki as the men were trying to counter the sudden and unexpected attack. The escort ships were already being hit hard and the Prime Minister was not in the best of moods as the reports came in. Damn those women and their vile tactics. They're using our own escort ships' hulls as shields so we can't fire at them without the risks of hitting our fellow men. The second in command of the Ikazuki tried to make the orders to have the remaining ships to defend the Ikazuki's vulnerable spots as the turrets on that side didn't have the speed needed to match up with the nimble dreads. The women had more technology at their disposal and that was why their dreads were more agile in combat and could be harder to hit. The Prime Minister ordered the release of the Vanguard forces, even though his second in command was telling him that all of the pilots they had for the Vanguards were mere trainees with no actual combat experience. The minister retorted that they would shame their forefathers if they allowed them to be defeated like this if they didn't use their new weapons to combat the women. The announcement came all over the ship as the men rushed to get into their uniforms and get into their vanguards and fight with the women, never mind the fact that none of them had any actual combat experience in space and against the dreads of the women. With some of the mechanisms for launching the vanguards damaged or offline from the initial attacks of the women, the men had to improvise in releasing their machines and soon a large force of vanguards were unleashed to face off with the women. However, without the proper experience to help them adapt and with only their fists as weapons, the male pilots were not doing well. Some had latched onto the dreads and were attacking them, but they were not able to do much as they had no weapons to speak of. One dread pilot commented as she spoke out at the sudden appearance of the vanguards. "Eek, what are these things? They're in my way." One voice however spoke out and seemed to bring the women back into focus on what they had to do. "Don't worry about the vanguards. Ignore them and focus on the main ship of the men's fleet." Roger. Naruto moved through the corridors and tried to find an alternate route to the hangar to get his marked vanguard back before things got too dicey. So far, the blonde Hokage's predictions that the attack of the women had diverted the attention of the men away from him proved to be spot on, but he was still wary of possible encounters with the Ikazuki's security force. He moved through the room and quickly turned to hide from a group of guards running in another direction. Halt! Naruto turned to look and spotted an egg-shaped thing floating before him. He quickly realized that this must be one of those robots he heard about. This model series was supposed to have been repurposed as some sort of sentry. Identify yourself. Naruto didn't want to do anything rash. After all, it was just a machine doing what it was built to do, but time was not exactly on his side, so he tried to reason with the thing, though he had his doubts on the matter being easy to resolve with only words. "Look, shorty, I don't have time to explain those things, nor do I plan to introduce myself, so if you don't mind I have to leave a Subject is an intruder, switching to restrain mode to capture subject. There goes the neighborhood." Naruto quickly leaps away as the floating robot fires a stun bolt at him. As soon as he landed on the ground behind the robot, he quickly takes out one of his unsharpened kunai with the blade covered with hard rubber. It was a non-lethal weapon he cooked up to hit a person without killing or wounding them, knocking them out with blunt force trauma, though he made sure to keep his strength from going too high. This attack did its job as the robot was hit in the back hard and sent flying into a nearby cell. Naruto quickly rushed in and pressed the nearby switch to activate the energy bars to seal the robot in. He moved away as the robot turned and spoke out. Subject has resisted. Stronger voltage author euro. ZZZZZTTTTT. Boom. Another hit struck the ship and made the ship move to the other side. Naruto managed to hold himself quickly as he used his chakra to anchor his feet to the floor, but the robot didn't have that as it was slammed hard into the cage and was now being shocked. The blonde recovered quickly enough, but when he saw the robot squealing in electronic cries of pain, he couldn't find it in himself to abandon the robot even if it was just a machine. He quickly hit the switch and the bars went dead. He looked at the downed machine and decided to take it along. The machine could be useful and maybe he might finally get to try those programs he had managed to rustle up and modify for himself. He was no tech-savvy nut like some of the men who worked in the information centers he had infiltrated more than once while on Talark, but he got by, and besides, the robot might be good company, though he rather preferred living companions to mechanical ones. Euro. The space battle was still very much in full swing and soon the dreads were able to make their way into the Ikazuki, blasting through the hull and diving into several openings made by their weapons. The men quickly sealed up the atmosphere and soon restored gravity into the ship to fight the women. The women came out of their dreads and were dressed space suits and wore masks designed to look like monsters, no doubt to capitalize on the propaganda portrayal of women by the men. It was not long before another man shows up, and it was none other than Bart Garces. The young blonde cadet had been hiding ever since the attack had began in the same room that had been vacated by the other cadets the very second they had been given the launch order by the Prime Minister. He was sent free floating into the atmosphere when they deactivated the gravity in the room to launch some of the vanguards in the same room and had managed to hide inside the statue of Grandpa. As soon as he saw the women in their disguises, he panicked and shouted out in fear. "Those things are women." He turned around as another dread came barreling into the room and he quickly panicked again and hid once more in the statue, which was soon decapitated by the dread, and Bart's head popped out from the now headless statue like a twisted version of a jack-in-the-box. In the dread itself, the pilot was not doing well as she cried out in panic. "I can't stop." She accidentally fires her dread's weapons and those said blasts are heading right into the wall which led to the reactor of the ship. Euro. Naruto found himself in a massive room and one seriously huge glowing sphere with lines of power around it. He decided to keep moving as he knew that this was going to be his best chance of finding that marked vanguard and getting out of this ship, as the continuing sounds of fighting was not a good sign in his mind. But as he was crossing the halfway mark to the other side, something stopped him. It felt like a voice of some sort trying to reach him, and for a moment, the blonde Sanin wondered if he was hearing things or a ghost was nearby. He looked about and then wondered why it seemed that the voice was actually coming from the massive sphere before him. Okay, this is just plain creepy. Euro. That thing is supposed to be a power supply or something. It's not like the things I've seen back home. But just as Naruto was about to chalk it up as a figment of his imagination, his danger senses kicked into overdrive and he turned to see the walls glow, signs of an explosion, and the blonde tried to move away from the coming explosion, but it was too late as he was knocked aside. Euro. Meanwhile, the ship was soon rocked by another set of explosions, but this was not due to another attack by the women this time around. The Prime Minister had just activated the explosive separation charges. The Prime Minister decided to separate the new section of the Ikazuki from the old section to keep the new section of the Ikazuki from falling into the hands of the pirates. The second in command tried to reason with the man, but it was too late as the switch had been activated. The sight of the old section being separated from the new had a dismaying effect on the young cadets who were still in the old section. However, Duero was not too badly bothered by what he was seeing, as he knew that for all their talk of bravery and honor, the leaders were the real cowards and liars. Euro. In the reactor room. Euro. Oh, Euro. That was not what I was expecting. Naruto felt his body begin to respond to his brain as he decided to move his hands a bit as he realized that something was on top of him. The very second Naruto reached out with his hand to move away what was on top of him, he touched something that was soft, warm, and squishy. The blonde briefly wondered just what he touched, but the second he touched a bit more and moved his hand, as well as hearing the moan that followed, he recognized it. I'm touching a woman. Euro. This better not be a dream, or I swear I am going to really pissed off. Naruto opened his eyes and saw a being on top of him with a weird monster-like mask, but he knew that it was a woman on top of him, not some monster. Most men of Talark would have been frightened by what they would see, but not the blonde. He had seen far worse disguises in his day, and truth be told, the women's use of masks and bodysuits to hide their appearance and fool the men into being afraid of their supposed monster visage was fairly normal. He quickly, however, moved away and managed to rein in his mind's sudden burst of happiness and perverted ideas. He didn't blame his body's reaction at all, and for good reason, as it had been hard being on a world of men for 6 months. Of course, His previous experiences with girls, namely his wife Sakura when they were younger, told him that getting frisky with a woman without her express permission was an open invitation for a serious slap, or a serious beating, neither of which was promising to the blonde Sanin as he was now looking at the disguised female. The Megal Dread pilot, one Dita Liebly by name, was utterly happy and eager to look at the actual alien before her. She quickly removed her helmet as well as get her tiara free from the lower part of her suit and soon spoke to the blonde and blue-eyed male before her. Wow, a real live alien. Naruto on the other hand was admiring the now revealed girl. Being deprived of female companionship in every sense of the word for 6 long months made him very eager to devour just about every detail he could see on this woman. Deep blood red hair all the way to her legs and with 2 lush tails on the sides of her head, heart-shaped face, nice lips, and blue eyes. Damn Naruto, she's very cute. As for Dita, she marveled as she looked at Naruto. She had heard the stories her fellow women said about men. They said that they were ugly, inferior and all that. But she was not really caring for those stories. Dita was a very open-minded girl and she wanted to meet men as she saw them as aliens. And this alien before her was very interesting. His eyes were deep blue, deep and slightly glowing somewhat, but they were not terrifying to the redhead. In fact, those slightly glowing blue eyes were cool-looking in her mind. It made her even more intrigued by her first alien contact. She also noted the odd whisker-like marks on his face. There were 3 of them on either cheek. They didn't look bad to her. They just added to the overall picture of a very interesting alien in her mind. She decided to try and establish first contact by moving her hand in a few gestures. Naruto wondered just what the cute redhead was trying and decided to amuse her by repeating the exact actions she was taking and see what the results of his reply to her gestures was going to be. Once he did that, the redhead smiled even more and became livelier than ever. It worked. I did it. I made first contact. Naruto had no idea what she was going on about, but he decided that he needed to get going. There was no telling if and when the other women from Megal were coming, and while this girl before him was not one of the man-hating kind, he knew better than to stick around for one if not all of the women who were the man-hating kind would find him, since he had no idea what they might do to him when they caught him. With that in mind, he decided to get up and get moving. He checked his person to see if everything was there, and when he was sure that everything was there and he then picked up the robot, he turned and smirked a bit at the redhead. As much as I'd like to entertain you, I have to get going, and I am not an alien. I'm as human as you, area Euro, just a bit different than most. Naruto got ready and moved away, hoping to get enough distance between him and the girl, which was not going to be too hard even though he kept his speed normal as he sensed no immediate danger around him just yet. Dita, however, was not keen on losing sight of her first alien contact and shouted out as she tried loosen herself free of her suit to reveal herself wearing a tank top, short-length boots, a long-sleeved short jacket and mini skirt. Wait, I want to take a picture. Unknown to either of them, the reactor known as the Pyxis was glowing as if sensing the two of Tama Euro. Euro. Meanwhile, the men were not in the best of moods as they were all being herded away as they had been forced to surrender to the women who had finally secured the ship. They were soon being herded to the Ikazuki's escape pods. Along with them was a certain Talark first-class graduate. Duero looked about and wondered just what was going to happen, though his attention went to the women. They certainly were different looking than in the films the ministry usually showed to him and his fellow men. For one thing, despite the difference in the chest region as well as facial features, skin tones and the like, they looked human to him. I know this stuff is a disinfectant, but even so, I still can't stand the smell. One of the women said as she removed her suit's helmet and began to remove her suit as well. This woman was none other than Jura Basil Eldon. She served as the second in command of the Dread Squadrons. She was a statuesque blonde woman with her lush blonde hair reaching up to the back of her posterior, deep emerald green eyes, a well-formed face, and deep red lips. She had the face of a model and the figure of one as well as she had all the curves and swells in the right places that a woman should have them, plus her bust was very well formed and natural in the way they moved when she finally removed her suit. Jura had on a dress which was rather revealing to say the least, as it had an open front that was up to her navel that showed the inner areas of her with the parts of said dress that covered her bust held by a metallic ring. The dress was a dark violet style dress with slits on either side of the long skirt held at a type of comfortable collar with rather thin leather straps there as well. She had a set of sleeves which were held by several soft brown leather straps that were comfortable to her skin, as well as a pair of comfortable ankle-length boots. She also had a rapier on her side and seemed to know how to carry it. The next to remove her helmet was an aqua-haired woman who had some sort of circlet there with her that was covering the left side of her face. She had her hair in a short boyish style and wore something that was similar to a flight suit which was in white and black that allowed any observer to see her curves and swells. However, MEIA was not the kind to be mistaken for a regular girl. She was the ace pilot of the Dread Squadrons of the Pirates, and despite the fact that she was only a year younger than Jura, she was the undisputed leader of the Dread Squadrons as well. She looked about and asked around to her fellow women who were in the room overseeing the removal of the men while also tending to those who were injured in the initial attack on the Ikazuki. Has anyone seen Dita? I have seen her. The last I saw of her she was barreling down the corridor and crashing through that bulkhead wall of Euro Ow. The woman in question was an emerald-haired and violet-eyed beauty by the name of Barnett Orangelo. She was also a dread pilot like the other two women as well as the redhead in question. She wore a swimsuit-like uniform that showed the upper portions of her while covering them at the same time, along with showing her back. She also had thigh-length boots and her outfit was in dark and light violet colors. She had some sort of decorative hairpin on her hair and wore long gloves that were up to half of her arm though one glove was off. She had been wounded by a Talark bullet round during the attack and was currently being treated by a young girl who was dressed in something that resembled a French-made outfit. On a fully grown woman at a young age, this would have been rather tempting, even more so if said woman was like either Barnett or Jura, but the wearer of said uniform was actually an 11-year-old girl with her hair in two large odangos. Sorry about that. Careful Paiwei. My skin is very delicate you know. Just try to endure it. Barnett didn't like that and was not happy with the fact that her once perfect skin was now marred. Nurses are supposed to be more gentle and understanding towards their patients. I'm trying you know. Paiwei Underberg was the pirate's official nurse despite the fact that by most technical laws, she was too young to hold such a position. This was obvious to Duero who had observed the situation and while he saw that she had promise, she didn't have the medical training and experience to be fully fledged healer. However, he had little time to think about that as he was being guided along with his fellow men to the escape pods. However, he had an idea and decided to move away to a nearby locker area in the room they were in at the moment. As Meia looked about to find her fellow dread pilot, Jura looked about the room and was not the least bit impressed with what she saw. I went along with the group since they said this was going to be a good haul, but all of this just turns out to be nothing but junk. Meia then found the access area and knew that she now had the chance to go and find her young subordinate, but she knew that having some backup was a good idea. Jura, I'm going to go and look for Dita. I need you come with me to help make the search easier. The blonde sighed a bit and replied. This is the reason why I didn't like the idea of bringing a trainee. Meia managed to keep her thoughts cool but she made it clear to Jura that now was not the time to complain. We're shorthanded as it is since this was supposed to be a training mission for the new recruits in the force and the veterans were taking a break. If you didn't want to come along, you should have said so back in the base. The blonde sighed and got to follow her leader. All right, I'm coming, but I've got a feeling that Dita's doing something that she's not supposed to be doing. Euro. In a sub-bridge, 3 other women were busy doing their own work. One was Ezra Vivial, a kind-looking woman who was dressed in an outfit that was like the kind seen on a housewife. She was such that the idea of her carrying a laser rifle was plain wrong and she was rather attractive as well. The next woman was a bespectacled young girl who had her thick brown hair in 2 thick pigtails and wore the uniform that one would associate with an engineer and had the demeanor of one as well. Her name was Parfait Ballblair and she was head of the engineering group of the pirates and was there to give her mechanical and electronic expertise to the group. The last one of the trio was a tall woman who had dark skin, silver hair and wore what appeared to be a futuristic version of an Arabian harem girl outfit. The woman was very good looking and would have attracted the attention of any man. But she had the aura of a skilled fighter and a no-nonsense attitude as well as a high understanding of military tactics, plus the body of a fighter. These things suited her well as she was the second in command of the pirates and her name was Boozum Ikalisa or just BC to those who knew her. The commander was quick to begin accessing the database once she and the other two were in what appeared to be a sub-bridge of some sort. Ezra looked over the data but was unable to understand anything as it was in the Talark language. Oh my, I can't understand anything written in the men's language. Parfait grinned and replied as she pulled out a device that got Ezra's attention and the woman spoke to her younger companion. What's that thing Parfait? It's my interprico device. I made to translate any new language we encounter to our own so we can understand it. I made one for this chance. I can even make another one for the Commandura Euro. However, much to Parfait's surprise, the silver-haired woman seemed to be doing just fine when it concerned the data of the men in their language as she spoke. Meia, give me a status report on the men who we've rounded up. Meia's voice spoke out as well in answer. We've herded most of them to the escape pods and they are locked down at the moment, Commander. Good, dump them now, we'll let the men take their own alive. Parfait was stunned at that as she spoke. You can read the language of the men. Ezra smiled at that. That's the elite for you, Parfait. The head engineer pouted in disappointment at that discovery. Darn, and I worked hard in making this too. Euro. Naruto was moving along, still trying to get to the other side and hope that he would find his vanguard. He had managed to learn that this was the best path back to where his vanguard was stationed and as such, he took this route than any other. It would have been easier but he was not alone as a certain redhead was still following him. Wait up, Mr. Alien. Naruto turned and couldn't help but smirk a bit as he spotted the redhead. Got to admit one thing, she's persistent. Don't you have anything better to do, places to go, or something to Euro? Wait, what's your name anyhow? My name is Dita Liebly. Can't we at least have a little chat first? Naruto smiled as he looked at the young woman who was still following him and replied. Now isn't the right time for that sort of thing, Dita, I've got to go. Please. Despite the fact she was still a few ways from him, Naruto could tell that she was giving him the sad puppy dog eyes bit, and it was tempting to him to give in to the idea, but his practical side told him otherwise. Besides that, there was another side of him which was telling to do something other than chatting with the cute redhead a Euro. Hold it together. Just my luck, a Euro. 6 months away from women, and now my randy self wants to do that in the middle of a ship in space, a Euro. Man, I really need to keep my focus. A Euro. Meanwhile, on the ship of the Mina Euro, the Prime Minister was in a very dark mood as he looked at the image of the old Ikazuki section, which was soon being approached by the pirate vessel. The chance to bring glory and honor to the men of his world and to himself was ruined by those vile females. And now it seemed that they were going to pillage the Ikazuki's old section. That fact made his blood boil even more as he was listening in on the incoming reports of the pods being released. The Prime Minister ignored the words of the second in command on trying to find a peaceful solution to this mess and gave the order to unleash another of their super weapons. Ready the Murume's torpedoes, target the old section. What, are you seriously considering destroying the old section, Minister? I will rather have it destroyed by my hands than let those filthy women desecrate it even more. A Euro. Duero finally managed to mend the last bandage on the arm of his last female patient, who was none other than Barnet herself, as he made sure that she was not going to have a mark at all when the wound healed. The young man had earlier broken away to retrieve a coat from one of the lockers there. His actions had nearly gotten him in trouble with one of the women armed with a laser rifle. But he mentioned that he was a doctor, and he wasn't lying, as he was highly qualified in the Talark medical course in the academy. This had allowed him to stay and help the women, though he had no doubt that the women were not too happy with a man healing them. This had allowed him to study them even more, and his last patient was the last he had to study. Interesting, a Euro. Barnet did not like that as she spoke out. What? Why are you staring at me like that? Do you find something interesting about me? Duero smirked at that and replied. I do actually. Don't expect me to thank you. I don't. I think it's my time to leave. Highway recorded the whole thing and spoke as she looked at Duero. He touched a total of 5 girls. However, things got to be rather interesting as the ship was suddenly rocking about. A Euro. When the pirates found out that the men were aiming a missile at them, they tried to find a way to move the Ikazuki, but the engines were offline and there was nothing Parfait could do about it. With that problem in hand, the elderly leader of the pirates who was on their ship gave the order to evacuate, even though they were going to lose this catch of theirs. Magno had been the founder of the pirates and had a century of experience that was valuable to the women in many ways, and she treated them all more like daughters than followers, which was why she didn't hesitate to order them out of the ship before the missile was fired. Bosom nodded and sent the order to MEIA, who responded that she had lost Dita and would join up with them along with Jura once they found the wayward dread pilot apprentice. However, it was not long before the men fired the torpedoes at the ships. The Prime Minister had ordered the missiles fired as they in his mind had more than enough fuel, and soon they were on their way. The pirate cruiser, which was previously trying to stop the men from firing the weapons at them with their ship's own beam weapons, now found themselves with an even bigger problem. The pirate cruiser had just docked and attempted to fire at the torpedoes in the hope of destroying them while evacuating the crew, but with the missiles somehow coated with some sort of energy-resistant alloy and being too small to hit with their weapons, that proved to be a bad idea. A Euro. In the reactor room, a Euro. Dita, MEIA and Jura were looking down as they spotted Dita pursuing Naruto, and while it seemed that the man the redhead was following was being a Euro calm about this, the two were not happy, or at least MEIA was, as Jura spoke in an amused tone. See what I meant before, MEIA, she's chasing a man of all things. The two wasted no time and were soon after the redhead, and it was not long before they were able to catch up with Dita as Naruto had to climb over some debris. But as soon as they reached the redhead and MEIA was about to scold her, the blonde male turned around and spoke to them. Well now, company's arrived, I see. Nice looking company too. That was enough to force MEIA aim her laser ring at the blonde while making sure that she was between him and her two companions. Hold it. One wrong move and I'll shoot. A Euro. Naruto gave both MEIA and Jura as well as Dita very appreciative looks, and he grinned warmly. 3 beautiful honest Takami females before him at last. A very cute redhead, one tough-looking but undeniably sexy aqua-haired girl, and one gorgeous blonde who would have been a bombshell back home. If all 3 of them were to walk in Konoha, he would have no doubt that every man, young and old, civilian or ninja, would have been trying everything to get to know them, and it was not just for the sake of talking to them either. Now this is a sight worth looking at. Shame that I have to go. Meia did not understand why was it that even though she had her laser ring at him in a posture of attack, he didn't seem the least bit bothered by that fact, and this confused the blue-haired girl, and it was not long before she snapped at the smirking blonde male. What are you looking at? Naruto gave her a confused look and replied. What? I'm just admiring you three ladies. Your red-haired friend's very cute and she has an innocent and kind aura around her and I find that very nice. You've got the, I can kill you without any problem and still look good doing it, look going for you, and that has its own attractive qualities. And your blonde friend Ayuro, wow. She's as gorgeous as a fashion model, even more so with the sword and the dress, she's definitely a blonde beauty for sure. Juro was utterly confused by what just happened as the blonde male gave her a very warm grin. Did that man actually Ayuro compliment me? Meia was completely confused by this Ayuro male, he was not acting like any of the men that she and the others had dealt with earlier. She was used to many situations in her long career as a pirate and leader of the Dread Squadrons, but this was one situation that she had no experience in. Instead of being scared of her and her fellow women, and not wanting to do anything around tame Ayuro, this male was actually Ayuro admiring them, he even considered them attractive. What is going on here? Who is this man? Naruto was enjoying this as he looked over the three Dread pilots, making sure to remember every detail of their appearance and build. He was not kidding with what he said to Dita, Meia, and Juri either. The redhead was an innocent and yet had a body build that was very attractive, especially with the way she was dressed. Tank top that hugged a very nice bust which was right for her frame and build, long-sleeved short jacket, soft boots and skirt that showed some very nicely shaped legs. The aqua-haired woman had a very serious look, yet she also had beauty in her face as well as her body. The suit showed her very much athletic build which showed a woman who was well-toned and trained, in itself attractive, and the odd-looking circlet she had didn't detract her beauty at all, just made her look more exotic, and after his life being married, he liked the exotic look every now and then. As for the blonde with tame Ayuro, well, she was undeniably hot in the mind of the blonde ninja. She's got a figure that would have made any man worth his manhood get hot under the collar. Her bust looked real nice, they moved naturally as he looked at. Once again, the blonde Sannin and former Hokage thought to himself about how the men of Talark saw women and reinforced his belief that they had no idea what they were mission. Naruto however knew that now was not the time and reluctantly stopped his study of the three women and spoke. You know, as much as I'm enjoying this moment, it's time for me to leave and you as well, so I think now is a very good time to part ways. Bye. With that Naruto turned around and left, leaving the three Dread pilots alone. Dita however was not planning to let Naruto leave just like that as she moved to follow the blonde male. Mr. Alien, wait up. I still need to chat with you. However, she was stopped by Meia who managed to recover from the rather odd meeting with the blonde male and realized that he had a point. There is no time. We have to leave now. Dita nodded and soon followed Meia, though she gave a sad glance to Naruto who was already on the move to his own vanguard to get out of the area quickly before the men decided to turn the old Ikazuki into nothing, ruined metal and debris. Jura decided to follow, but as she looked at Naruto who was now moving away, she had to admit that she had given him a studying look earlier. For a man, he's not bad looking, he's got very intense blue eyes, and those whisker marks make him look rather Ayuro. Wait a minute. Why am I thinking about him like that? I hate men, even if they compliment my beauty. The blonde shook her head of such unladylike thoughts and joined the others as they were soon in their dreads and ready to fly out of the place before everything went down the drain. Meia contacted Bosom that the team was together and they were now going to escape as Bosom and the others were now in the pirate ship. Ayuro. However, just as it seemed that the three Dread pilots were going to escape, one of them ran into a bit of a problem. When she had barreled through the Ikazuki in her entry attack earlier, Dita had inadvertently fired her Dread's weapons and created two holes in the walls. These same holes had expanded somewhat when her Dread hit the wall, and now they were holding the Dread fast. Dita realized that quickly and was trying her best to get her Dread free, but it seemed that the wall was holding her fast. Oh no, my Dread is stuck, I can't break free. Naruto was quick to notice the problem and was on his way to remedy the situation as he changed direction and rushed to the Dread at high speed, which was seen by Dita who was surprised by Naruto's sudden action to come towards her. It was not long before he arrived to the area where Dita's Dread was still trapped. Naruto quickly made the seals to use his trademark jutsu since he knew that he was going to have to make this quick before this entire ship would go down into atoms. Most men of Talark would have just left the young redhead to die as she was an enemy. And in most cases, Naruto should not be bothering with this kind of situation. But Naruto was not the kind of person to let innocent people suffer, and the cute redhead certainly qualified as an innocent person. Kage Bushin no Jutsu. In several bursts of smoke Naruto summoned 3 Kage Bushin to aid him. As soon as the Kage Bushin were present, he quickly gave several hand gestures to them. They nodded as they all took out one of their swords and the four ninjas summoned the wind elemental chakra into the swords, making them glow deep blue in a moment. Naruto smiled as the energy was enough and both he and a Kage Bushin were near one of the front sections of the dread. Then a pair of them moved to the other side of Dita's dread and then all four of them cut into the metal. The wind element chakra enhanced blades cut through the metal with ease as Naruto's control over his chakra had improved considerably since his rise in the ranks. As he and his Kage Bushin were finished cutting the metal, they quickly kicked away the sliced-off metal, effectively freeing the dread and the young girl. The two other Kage Bushin joined the original and their companion and they placed their sword back in their sheath. The three Kage Bushin then disappeared in clouds of smoke and that left the original Naruto to give the redhead a warm smile as he spoke. Okay, you're free to go. Dita was utterly wide-eyed at the show of power that the alien had shown before her. He had made copies of himself and somehow made his sword and those of his other copies to glow and cut through metal. She smiled happily and knew that she had really found herself a really cool alien and a kind-hearted one too. She spoke out through the dread's communicators to Naruto. Wow, that was so cool. You're a really nice alien. Naruto sighed and nodded as he moved away, happy that he had freed the young innocent redhead from harm. Now he headed to his vanguard and get moving out of the Ikazuki. His danger senses were already telling him to vacate the area and he trusted his danger senses a great deal. As soon as he got into the vanguard, he began to power up the systems and soon the machine was at full power. He grabbed the controls and began to move the vanguard out of its reclining position. Both Jura and Meia had not been close enough to see Naruto free Dita's dread, so they were in the dark about the powers that Naruto had just shown to their much younger comrade. They were very happy that their comrade was free and soon they were all going out of the Ikazuki as best they could, just as Naruto's marked vanguard was now on its feet and joining them in escaping. However, they were few moments too late as the missiles were now too close for them to get out in time, and the same could be said for the pirates. €. In the pirate cruiser €. Missile impact in 25 seconds. We can't avoid a direct hit. Magno spoke to that. Hit or miss, it's our destiny. €. In the reactor however, the Pyxis suddenly glowed brightly and soon flashed out in a blast of pure light. This was not lost to Naruto as he suddenly sensed the energy coming from the Pyxis as it hit his chakra senses, alerting the blonde that something was happening. What the heck? It was then that the missiles hit hard, just as the Pyxis unleashed a wave of energy all over the ship itself internally. €. Boom. €. In the bridge of the new section. Minister. Scans indicate that we're losing mass. The Ikazuki and the Megal ship's signatures are nowhere to be found. I hope you pirates enjoy the embrace of death and the taste of defeat. €. Inside a sea of pure glowing blue-green light, Naruto wondered just what was happening, but he looked to see that he was not alone as a massive figure that looked like a machine appeared before him. What is that? He then felt like he was falling and turned to see that he was not alone as there was the egg-shaped robot with him and the three women as well, all of them crying out as they all fell. Naruto on the other hand felt something else entirely as Dita cried out towards Naruto. Mr. Alien. Inside of the blonde Hokage and Sannin however, another voice spoke out. Hama Euro, this is odd, it's been some time